Hello and welcome to Your Average Bear Gaming. I'm George, and today we're finally going to get around to painting this guy. That's the Tau Broadside. It looks awesome, and this one is fully magnetized. Which means I get to paint a bunch of pieces separately. I am super excited. I have some new ideas on how to make this guy pop, make him look better than the Cold Star. So, what do you say? Let's get started. Yeah! Here's our boy, looking all snazzy in his badass armor. So we're going to do the usual, right? We're going to go with a base first, then we're going to do some glazing, and then we're going to do some detailing, and then we'll be done, right? It's a speed painting kind of a deal. I'm going to try to be a little bit more detailed than I have in the past, but still, you know, nice and quick. So I'm going to go with the same kind of color scheme that I've done in the past. The kind of reinforced armor looking deals, like these big pads on the leg, for example, they'll have a lighter gray. Things underneath will have a darker gray, and the glaze will be the kind of the one color, and then when I wash it over, it'll have kind of a darker color. So the first thing we do is we split this up into a bunch of sub-assemblies. So aside from the gray, there'll be some blue accents, and the weapons, like so this is the second half of that thing, will be black. So that should be pretty straightforward. And as per usual, I'm going to start with the legs. You'll see how everything was basically unglued so that we can get into all the little nooks and crannies that we will need to get into. So the glaze I've chosen for the under pieces of the armor is this darker gray that I was hoping would be darker than the base coat, and it is a little bit, but it's not that much darker. So let me try to darken it up a bit. For my base glaze, I've used a uniform gray, and I've darkened it up a little bit with some black. Mixed it in with a little bit of this stuff, Airbrush Flow Improver, and just a touch of water, just to give me kind of a glaze consistency. So it should be a little darker than the primer, which is kind of like a medium gray. I'm going to try a little close-up thing that I usually don't do, but, you know, try new things. Hopefully this stays in focus better than my previous work. But you'll see how the gray is very nearly the same color as the prime color. It's just a little darker. That's not going to be the last color. That's going to be kind of the base layer, and that'll get darker with a wash. So just get in there underneath all those big metal armor plates. You should be good. This doesn't have to be a clean process. It's your first pass. It's going to be fine. And for pieces like this here, the back, I'm not sure what parts are going to be kind of this dark gray and what parts are going to be light gray. So what I recommend there is to just kind of go over it with the dark gray. You can always go back and lighten it up later. I should point out that the sub-assemblies that I'm that I've chosen to work with here may not be the ones that you want to use. As I'm painting this, I realize that maybe I could have been a little more selective. And what I mean by that is this subassembly here, it's a little tight getting to the back of the mech, to the back of the battlesuit. Maybe don't glue this piece right here, this, I don't know what this is, like a shield or something like that, or kind of the back of the reactor. May be a good idea to wait on gluing that on to the model until after you're done painting. You can still get it in there, it's just a little tight, and it isn't conducive to your, top tier painting job. So there's that to think about for sure. But this top piece doesn't have a ton of the dark gray armor, so that's my secondary color. And that's fine because there's quite a bit of it here on the leg piece. So you'll see how I've managed to get all that stuff taken care of. Making sure that the hip, this attachment point, that is left for the primary armor color. And so that's most of this model taken care of. At least that phase of it. So what I'll do is I'll move on to the arms, because there's going to be some of that. And so this is the arm, this is the left arm that has that shield. I've glued it on there temporarily so I can get in there and do close to my best work on this piece. And so here I'm going to pick out kind of the joint that's going to be the secondary armor color, the darker gray, leaving most of the arms to be the primary armor color, which is going to be the lighter gray. And I'll hit the inside of this pauldron with the secondary color. Actually, you can go with either your secondary or your primary color depending on what you want. I kind of want something darker in here, so I'll go with the secondary color. Although since this is an armor piece, the argument could be made I should have gone with the primary armor color, but that's okay. And I'll get the inside of these pauldrons with the dark armor color. And they'll contrast nicely with the outside. That'll be my primary armor color. So I've got the body primed with the first color, and so now I'm going to move on. Before I move on to the second color on the body, I kind of just want to start on these guns because they look so cool, and I'm looking forward to painting them up. I'm going to give them a base of black glaze kind of all over. And so all the weapons will be mostly black. But once the base is on there, I'll come back and add some extra something or the other to the guns to make them look more interesting than just black. But first things first. So aside from these main weapons like the arms, you also want to do these accessories. So these are weapons too, so I'm going to hit them with the black base coat. It's a glaze, but it's acting kind of weird. It feels sticky, almost like an oil. And I say that having not touched oil-based paint in decades. it just, I don't know, the consistency feels a little off. But it's having the effect that I want, so I guess it's all in my head. That's fine. Alright, I've got my weapons based. They look kind of like that. They're still drying off a little bit. So it's time for me to move over to the second armor component. The stuff you see here is light gray. I'm going to paint that over. That's just the primer. And I'm using a combination of ash gray, whitened up a bit with some matte white. Mix it up with some flow improver and a little bit of water to give me a very nice thin glaze. But it's a thin glaze that still covers really well because of that flow improver. It does a tremendous job. I kind of want you to see how it flows here. And it flows while covering. I'm telling you, this combination, at least for me, it has changed my life. My hobby life, anyway. It goes on super easy, no muss, no fuss. That's assuming you get the mixture right, so it takes a little bit of playing with it. But once you got it down, oh man, it's so pretty. So you'll see here I've got most of the body. I'm just missing kind of the armor on the toes, but I'm going to need a smaller brush for that, so I'll come back to it once that dries. And I'll move on to other parts of this model. Now you might be thinking that this looks a little gloopy when it's going on, and it kind of does. But that's okay, it's super thin, so when it dries, it doesn't stay gloopy. It just gives it a nice coverage. For smaller pieces like this guy, this is the disc that goes on the main weapon. For this model, I find it useful to put them on these little sticks with sticky tack. This is particularly helpful if you're painting both sides of a thing and it's really, really small, or at least small enough that you're going to have some trouble, getting in there without spilling over much. It's one of those little tricks of the trade that I've picked up along the way. But it is important to note as you're doing this that the sticky tack will sometimes decide to peel off some of your paint, particularly if it hasn't cured for a long time. So you have to be kind of aware of that. Now these two parts right here, they're not actually going to be gray. So this is the head and this is the pauldron. They're actually going to be blue, but I want to undercoat them in this light gray. They're not going to stay this way, but I want to make sure that they're undercoated in a light color so that the eventual blue that I do use for this piece, it stands out nicely. Normally you do this with, say, a white paint, but this light gray is close enough that it'll do the trick, and that way you don't have to mix a special, white paint for it. And, it provides also some continuity to the model. And for this piece, I want to make sure to get this edge, because this part of the pauldron will be visible sometimes, so I want to make sure that it is not ignored, that I'm deliberate in how it shows up at the end of the model painting project. Now I mentioned before how it feels like sometimes when I'm applying this base coat it feels like my brush is way too loaded with paint, and it's going to leave a gloopy mess. But if you mix your paints right, that isn't the case, and I'll show you with these legs that are basically already dry. You'll see how that light gray dried very nicely. It's not gloopy at all. You can't tell that I overloaded my brush, and that's because I mixed it in with that airflow improver as well as some water. So it has a nice, it leaves a nice finish behind. So at this point I have some decisions to make about how I proceed. I'm pretty happy with the way this base coat has come together, and I mean, I actually could use maybe another coat on this chest plate. There's a little bit of the background gray showing up. I think it's okay, but I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking about doing another pass. But I'm going to do something else first, because what my next step was going to be, so I have my a decision to make, right? I can do the wash or I can do some detailing, and the reason I was thinking about doing some detailing is, you notice these legs here, I want to add some bands of blue color to kind of like separate that out, to make them stand out a little bit more. My previous models have been kind of one-dimensional, kind of too minimalistic and clean, so try to do something a little different here. But I'm thinking I'm going to do that after the wash. And so I'm going to use a dark wash to bring all these grays a tone darker, get into those little crevices and gaps, and bring the two different grays kind of closer together in tone by darkening them both down a bit. It has the effect of making the grays look closer together, at least to my eye. So I'm going to need some dark tone wash, and that's going to be this stuff right here. As usual, I use Army Painter because that's the only paints that I have. And since I'm going to start with the dark tone, and I like to thin them down for these gray models, I'm going to actually start with the weapons. Now, the weapons are already black, but before I finish these guns, I want to add some kind of variability in the color. I'm going to do some dry brushing of maybe a lighter gray on the edges, maybe pick out a few details. But before I do that, I want to make sure that the crevices are extra dark. And it's a very subtle thing, so I'm going to use the darkest dark tone I can find and just kind of slather this dark on there. It's going to make the black a little more dark, which is part of what I want, but it's also going to sink into those crevices a bit. And my hope is, I don't know if this is going to work or not, but my hope is that once I go in there with a dry brush and maybe do some edge highlighting as well, that those crevices will show up a little nicer. That's the plan. I think it's worked in the past, but I wouldn't put in a bunch of money on that. I think it makes a difference. So I'm going to give it a shot. It's just a quick job here. And since I have so many weapons, it might pay off. And I'm doing this darkest of the dark washes before the gray stuff, because what I end up doing is I take this dark tone and I thin it out quite a bit to put it on the gray. So it's still a dark wash, but it's a little lighter. It's quite a bit lighter. And so before I thin that down, I want to use the concentrated stuff here on the black. It makes sense to my mind. I don't know if it actually works out, but I think it does. I think what I'll do here to kind of demonstrate the difference, if there is one, is I'm going to take these two weapons that are paired, and I'm going to hit, these two weapons, so this missile pack and this, I don't know, plasma rifle or whatever. I'm going to hit one of them with the dark tone and the other one I'm going to leave it alone so we can kind of see if there is a difference. Am I buying anything? Is there any value add to this step? I think there is, but nothing beats a good old-fashioned test, a side-by-side demonstration. So here are those pieces that I washed as a test, and I think you can see the difference on camera. I'm not entirely sure if it translates. I think the difference is clearer on this set of weapons than it is on this set of weapons. But here, this weapon here has been washed. This has not. And here, this set of weapons has been washed, and these have not. So you can see that there is a bit of a difference, but it's really subtle. And it's a little easier to see on closer inspection, but it's confounded a bit by the fact that the wash makes the gun glossier. So the wash dries kind of glossy, and so that kind of combines itself with the extra darkness of the wash to kind of to make it look more different than it really is. It's really, really subtle, but the intended effect is there. The crevices are a little darker than the surfaces, and that should be more pronounced when I do some dry brushing, but that's later on in this project. You'll see here it's quite more subtle. Most of the difference you see between the weapons is that sheen, but there is some difference. I don't know for a fact that there is value in this, but I'm going to continue doing it because, I don't know, I feel like there's value. I feel like I've delayed this long enough. I'm kind of afraid to start this process because I'm afraid I'm going to mess it up, but here we go. I've thinned down that very same black tone that I used on the weapons, and I'm going to start trying to be kind of careful applying some of that same wash over these armor panels. And you'll see what I was hoping for is kind of working. It's crawling into those crevices, but it's also kind of pooling a lot, so I want to make sure that it doesn't pool. So you'll see here how it kind of wants to pull towards the bottom. I suck it up a little bit with the brush, lay it down somewhere else. Basically, I want to make sure there's a little bit everywhere, but nothing like that. See right there, that pool? Let's get rid of that. And this color's going to go basically everywhere that's gray. Alright, the legs don't look so bad. We'll let this dry to see what it looks like when it's all said and done, but it should look pretty decent. Just want to make sure I don't miss any spots, and there's so much to this model that it's very possible for me to miss stuff. Yeah, that looks pretty decent. It's the secret to a speed paint is to use washes to bring out those details that would otherwise take you forever by hand, and they wouldn't look half as good. We'll do the same to all the other pieces of gray armor, like the arms, the chest area, and any other random bits and bobs that are supposed to be gray. It's looking pretty alright, I can't complain. It's a little messier than I would have liked. There's a couple of spots on the armor where I wasn't as careful as I should have been with the washing, so there's some spots here that there's that kind of accumulation that I didn't want. Another spot there, a little bit on the legs, kind of here, a little bit on the legs, kind of here. But overall, it's not bad, and I got the effect that I wanted, where the grays are more close together in tone value, maybe. I've heard people use that term. I'm not exactly sure what it means, other than maybe it's how light or dark something is, so I'm using it that way. And so it looks all right. It's time to start adding a little bit of the detail, not like the final detail, but some of the splashes of color that I do want to add to this model. So I'm going to add some bands of blue on the legs, maybe some on the details of the armor, just some splashes of color to make it look a little less sparse. Also probably end up giving it a black on this Tau symbol. There's not a ton of them on this model, but there's a couple. I'll go ahead and do that. And I'm going to go for this kind of blue. So this is the pauldron. This is Army Painter's crystal blue. I've been asked how I get the weird blue that I do. It's really just crystal blue, and then I go over it with some of this blue tone. And it does a really nice job of darkening up the blue and getting into the crevices there. So I'm going to start adding some of this blue on just like one of the stripes on the legs. And they don't necessarily have to be matching stripes either. And I can actually remove the body to make this easier. Alright, so I've added some details, not details, well, I guess some details, some color bands to the armor. Makes it look a little nicer. Not a ton happening here with the chest piece, but I did get a couple of little touches there. So that should look pretty neat. Yeah, got some on the arms, and so now it's time to make this blue really pop. The way I get my kind of distinctive blue is to get this and add some blue tone right over that existing blue. It darkens it up a bit and it crawls into those little crevices and it makes it look kind of glowy. I like the effect. Yeah, so it looks like that, and when it dries, it's going to look really cool. And do that to the rest of these pieces. So here's what my pieces look like. With the blue base and the blue tone over them. Look pretty nice. Kind of a fan. So there's quite a bit more color on this model than there were on my previous attempts, and I think that's going to work out pretty well. I've glued the torso to this model, so it's in its final pose. Obviously it's not done quite yet, but it's getting there. I've started to add some details on the weapons. So these missile fists, I'm kind of picking out the missiles themselves, so I've undercoated them in white. They're going to get an orange color, so they're both kind of that way. Same thing with this missile pack here. And I'm working. So for this big awesome gun, I've decided to try to be a little more detail oriented, a bit more creative. So I've done this. I've kind of picked out some of these crevices and have undercoated them in white. So they look kind of like that. And on those white surfaces, I'm going to add a highlight color, probably a red, but maybe an orange, maybe yellow. I don't know. I haven't decided yet. But the preparation is kind of coming along. So I'm kind of just dipping into those crevices, and I'm using a technique that I picked up somewhere along the way. Here's what the other half of the weapon looks like. So you can probably tell it's some pretty fine detail work. I mean, the crevices are nice and deep, but they're really thin, so it requires a steady hand. And I kind of have a little technique that I'm using to cheat, and I'm going to show you what it looks like. I've been calling it like a drop fill technique. I don't know what it's called. I'm sure other people use it. But the idea is you get a small brush with a sharp tip with a bit of water, and you touch the crevice. Kind of like this. And the water, through capillary action, will come off your brush and into the crevice, mostly into the crevice. So then you go back with that same brush with some white paint, and you touch that water. Kind of like so. And the line basically draws itself. But you want a decent amount of paint on the brush. And so there you have some pretty thin lines. Relatively easy. It's not the cleanest thing. You can always go back and touch it up, but it beats doing it the hard way. I suppose you can also do I think it's called a panel liner or something like that people sometimes use. I've never used that. I don't have any of that. This technique seems to work just fine. You'll notice some stray dots of white on parts of the gun that I did not intend to paint. I'll just touch those up with some black paint once I'm done with this. And so that's a work in progress. Sometimes you have to do that a couple of times to make sure you get a nice bright white, because you want a solid white foundation to add the color over that. So if you don't do a good job, if it's not very white, it'll look like there's a tint of red on black, and that's not the effect I'm going for. I also made an effort to pick out those little teeth on the weapon. I will make them the same color. I think I've got a lot of the details that this model needs pretty much taken care of. I mean, not the final step. There's still a few lights and some stuff like that to add. But I'm at the part of the project where I think I need to start doing some edge highlighting. And I'm going to start with the weapons, since there's a lot of edges to this weapon, to these weapons. So, since this is since these weapons are largely black, I'm going to start with some uniform gray, and I'm just going to do some edge highlighting here. I sometimes do this with the dry brush, but I think this time it's going to be best to just go with straight up edge highlights. I mean, we're still kind of dry brushing, but we're only dry brushing the edges so we can retain kind of the black look of the weapon itself. I find that when I do dry brushing in this step, it can get a little sloppy. So depending on your goals, it may be a good idea to alternate between the two approaches. I'm just picking up the major edges. I'm not going to worry about all the little ones. So there's the weapon with a little bit of edge highlighting, and on these little raised details on the gun, I did just do a light dry brush on those to kind of get the edges to stick out. Probably do that to this right here as well, just to kind of vary the color of the black there a little bit. That's not all the detail painting I'm going to do, but it's a large part of it. Even these back discs, presumably the ends of the missiles, those are edge highlighted too, but most of those are just airbrushed. Not airbrushed, dry brushed. We'll do the same thing to the rest of these weapons off camera. I'm done edge highlighting the weapons, and they look pretty decent. Even this big boy here. Obviously, there's some more details to go, but all the major stuff is there. All the edge highlighting is done. And before I move on, I want to do the same thing to my actual model. And it's tricky here because I like the way he looks, and messing with it could mean messing it up, but I'll give it a shot. I'm going to highlight or edge highlight with just some white, since the gray that I'm using here is actually pretty light. I want to add the highlights, but I also want to make sure that you can see them. So I'm going to just jump right to white. And I'm only going to hit those areas that are gray. Any white areas, I'll edge highlight with a different color. It's not really necessary. Like, you could go in with the white, and it still looks pretty decent, but I'm going to try to be a little bit of a better painter than I usually am. My lazy aesthetic can only take me so far. I've really been dragging my feet on this model, and I don't really have a good reason for it. I think part of it is there's kind of a lot of detail that I want to get to, and it's a little overwhelming. I also discovered that I had to remagnetize some stuff, so I'm kind of touching up where I had to drill after it was painted. But I don't have a really good reason for why I'm avoiding it, so I'm just gonna go. Sometimes this happens. So I'm going to find some details, and I'm going to paint them up with colors that I've already used for the most part, except for any emissive lighting effects. So I'm going to work on this kind of starting with the weapons. I think that's the way to go. So I'm going to pop out any details on the weapons that I think need to stand out, or that should be a different color, if for no other reason than to avoid just a monolithic black weapon. So I'm going to do this kind of this bottom thing. I'm going to do this top thing as well. I think that's maybe the scope, although the dude's in a mech, there's no way he's using the scope, but it could be like an aiming camera sensor deal. This ammo box, I'm guessing that's what it is, the ammo box. So I've been painting up the detailing on these weapons. So I've added a dash of color, well, not color, but, gray on some areas of the weapon. And then I've also given them a wash, so they kind of look a little bit like this. I'm going to go in there, I'm going to add a couple of panels to this gun, a couple of panels of blue, just to kind of kick it up a notch for additional color. But as I've been, painting these, I've realized that I don't like this red. And it was such a pain in the butt to do. I just don't like the way it looks. It kind of blends into the black. You don't really see it. So I think I'm going to redo this. Completely unnecessary, but I don't know if I'll be able to sleep without changing this. And I have an idea of what I think will look better. It's that really light blue that I've used for drones in the past. So I've mixed up some white with some flow improver and some quick shade medium. And I'm going to cover over all those little red lines. And I'm not going to use the water, kind of the drop fill technique, because it's a little laborious, and I still ended up having to touch up the sides, so it didn't buy me as much as I was hoping. So since I had to touch up the surrounding anyway, I'm just going to go with white. It's nice and thin though with that flow improver, so it's going to it's not going to stick to the sides very much. And I'm just going to cover all the red bits with white undercoat, and I'll go back over it with some blue. That's going to be a lot of work. Been adding a few more details to the weapons. Nothing too crazy, just enough to give them some additional something or the other. They're a little sloppy right now. I'm going to go back and clean them up. And the thing I want to point out is this guy. So this is what this BFG looks like. It's really sloppy right now, and that's okay. The intent is to do one more step and then clean it up a bit. I just wanted to show you what it looks like before this blue tone goes over it. So the blue that's on here right now is this Void Shield Blue by Army Painter. It's the lightest shade of blue that I have. And over that, I'm going to put some blue tone, kind of like so. And it should transform it into this really cool blue. Now, the blue tone, all the washes from Army Painter, they're pretty thick. And so to make sure that they flowed okay into these really tight little spaces, I added just a little bit of the flow improver, and it really does a nice job. lot of the details are done. They don't look great. So I still have some touching up to do, but I'm kind of nearing the end of the details I could add, and also kind of the skill level I can employ in adding them. I don't know why everything just kind of looks a little sloppy, and short of redoing it, I'm just, I don't know what the deal is there, but maybe it's just, maybe there's a reason I try to do minimalist models. It's because it matches my ability to do it. Anyway, one of the last details is adding the metallic. The only metallic paint I use on my Tau models is this weapon bronze from Army Painter. I throw it on the Tau emblems like so. So there's a little bit of bronze there and a little bit of bronze here on the pauldron. It's not going to stay bronze. I will add a layer of dark tone because I want the actual Tau emblem to stick out, and the dark tone helps me do that with minimal effort. And then I'll go over that with a silver dry brush to soften the yellow orangey tone of the weapon bronze. I don't want it to be actually bronze. I want it to be kind of a soft golden kind of a deal. And so those two next steps will allow me to do that. And before I do that, I need to work on the base. So I don't know what happened to this base. So I added the texture paint, and after a couple of days it started to just kind of come off, and so that base is primed. I can only imagine that the Agrellan earth did not stick to the primer for some reason. So I'm gonna have to scratch that off and try again. I'll do that off screen and show you the final results of this magnetized Tau broadside, such as it is. Well, there she is, our Tau Xv88, I think, broadside battlesuit. That's the important piece. Fully painted, fully magnetized, and doesn't look half bad. I was kind of unhappy with it as I was painting it, but I think it helps to see it all together. So I did a few more things than I normally do in my Tau battlesuits, and I'm kind of lukewarm with it. I like the idea of having more details like these stripes, but it introduces a place for me to be sloppy, and if there's a place for me to be sloppy, I'm going to find it and capitalize on it. So, kind of a mixed feeling about it, but when it's all said and done, I like the way it looks. It's fine. It's not great, probably not good either, but it's not the worst thing I've done. Maybe the worst Tau, certainly the worst battlesuit. No. The crisis suits were kind of crap too. Who knows? The point is, I drug my feet on this. Somewhere along the way, it stopped being fun. It was at the detail phase. The details, for some reason, there were just kind of so many of them to paint, and I kept getting sloppy, and I had to, touch up things, correct things. So it just took a lot longer than I'm used to, a lot longer than I wanted to, and as a result, I think I enjoyed it a lot less. Maybe my second time around, like if I ever build another one of these, maybe I'll feel better about it, but I just don't know. So it's fully magnetized. Here is the missile pack. You can swap it out with this pulse laser thingy, or pulse or plasma, whatever it's called. You can swap it out with this hunter killer missile analog. Looks pretty nice and beefy. Same thing on this side. This is the sensor kind of optics thing. You can put these weapons on either side. And it looks looks pretty decent, the magnetization. There's a little bit of a jankiness to some of the weapons, like if you'll notice here. They're a little janky, they're not quite perfectly aligned, but that's okay. It's my first attempt at this, and it could have been worse. Let's take these off, because I want to show you something. Remember how a little earlier in the video I was complaining about how these things don't stick right, yada yada yada. Well, look at this. They're sticking in place. I haven't tried the BFG yet, but these missile fists, they're pretty posable. Not like a ton posable, but you could, you could mess around with it. And so the thing that happened, you see what had happened was, when I magnetized this kit, so remember I had the stainless steel ball, or the steel ball, right on the hull there. Right after I glued them on, I coated them in epoxy putty, thinking that would give me a bit more friction. And maybe it did, maybe it didn't, but what it absolutely did do is attenuate the attractive force between the magnet and the steel ball. So as a result, it was a little squishy, right? And so no matter how much other stuff, so I put super glue on it, or like a layer of super glue to see if I could increase the friction. I put on some sticky tack. I did all kinds of things to try to increase the friction of this joint, certainly along the vertical axis, and I just couldn't get it done. It got worse and worse, and when I realized it was getting worse and worse, well, what if I cleaned off all the gunk? And so cleaning off the gunk seemed to have done the trick, at least for these missile fists. Let's see if the same holds true for our BFG. And, sort of, it's better than it was. Certainly, it's going to be tough to pose. Oh, well, okay. There's something there. But as you can probably see, if I do that, there's a gap between the arm and the gun. And that's okay. And it's going to move around as you pose them. But honestly, it looks all right. I can get behind this. So I've learned a couple of things about this model kit, and I'm pretty happy. Well, okay, I'm moderately happy with the results. I'm glad it's done. I've learned that I can in fact add some original level detail, and it doesn't look too cheesy, too cartoony. There's a little bit of cartoony-ish, but it probably is the thing that I'm kind of less happy with is how sloppy things are. And so the other thing I've learned is that if I drag my feet on a painting project, it's going to get worse and worse and worse. So the longer this went, the less motivated I was to finish it. I started off strong, and then I just kind of tapered off. I think I didn't touch this for like probably a week, 2 weeks after the magnetization was finished. Yeah, I got some Battlefield 2040, which I'm horrible at. I got a little game called Icarus. I reactivated my Netflix account, so I was doing a lot of relaxing. I was enjoying some other hobbies, but I let this fall by the wayside. I didn't make my self-imposed deadline for completing the Tau box. This is the last kit in the Tau box, so it's officially done now, except for it sort of kind of isn't. I'll explain in future videos. I've got one on, well, you'll see. If you want to see some additional Tau models out of me, I've got at least 2 more projects to go there, and then I got some other stuff to take care of as well. Should be interesting, should be fun, should be educational. At the very least, it should be a warning. You can learn from my mistakes. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. Have a wonderful afternoon. Be nice to yourselves and each other. Peace.